All right, so today we're going to be assembling Proton board. This is a 2020 Proton board with a Tramp Nano and a Ghost Atto. And I'm going to show you how I do it. The things you're going to need, obviously, soldering iron and solder. You're going to need some solder wick, definitely some flux. I like a good pair of tweezers. These are curved tweezers. These are some of the best tweezers I could find. And then, of course, some cleaning brushes. And then I like to take a base plate, an old base plate I'm not using, and some blue tack. Put some stack screws in it. And then I can just put it down on my mat here. And now I've got a nice little platform to work from. That'll keep everything nice and sturdy. All right, so let's get into it. We're gonna add the pins for the Atto and the Tramp in there. The best way I like to do this is I like to take the like the short side of the pins right here, and go ahead and stick them into the underside of the board. That way they're sticking out. The Tramp is going to go right there like that. And so with them sticking on the underside of the board, the short side, what I'm going to do is push down on the board so that kind of extend those pins out just a little bit. So I'm gonna push down just a little bit. All right, so there we go. Well, it was an uneven surface, of course, so they all decided they wanted to move differently. I'm gonna use this hard surface I got over here to get them nice and straight, even. Now you don't want them too tall, because if you get them too tall, then it's going to stick out and maybe touch your top plate, or it's going to be kind of in the way. That's why I use the short side instead of the bottom side. So now they're sticking out just enough to get a good solder joint going, and that's what I want right there. Just like that. All right. So that one's done. And now that that is done like that, I can go ahead and just tack on one side of it. Soldering iron right now is at 400 degrees. I like to use these really small chisel tips, just big enough to the size of these pads. I find that's the best. Same thing with here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tack one side of it like that. Just a little bit of solder on it. And now that it's on there, I'll pick it up, melt the solder, and just straighten it up a little bit. Now that it's nice and straight underneath, then I can put it on here and go ahead and get all the joints soldered in. Now we only want to add just a little bit of solder, not a lot at all, just a very small amount. Just enough to where it flows into it, just like that. That's the ground, so you can add just a little bit extra heat to the ground. A little bit of solder in there. Same thing here. All right, just a little bit in there. And with that, you've got those pins in, and they are nice, exactly how we want them. Keep testing as you go. You know that this is going to go in here like this. Sits in there just nice. That's actually backwards. There we go. All right, that's gonna be perfect. And then before we put these other ones in though, what we're gonna do is take this off. So the way I've found the best way is just kind of get some side snips, and just very gently kind of start prying up, just like that. Eventually it'll just come off, and you can pull it out. And then now you want to snip all of these off completely. And I've got the big boy. Let's see here. I've got the big boy to these right here. And man, these things will snip them all off in one bite. All right, so before you start snipping though, make sure it's nice and even. You're not touching anything else around. It's not touching the board right here. Everything is nice and even and straight. Like that. And then I'll put my finger over them and snip. All right, now I've got the rest, I've got all the excess in here. And then that snipped off real nice and clean. Just like that. Throw those away. All right, now we need to do the 4-pin. Exact same way. We stick the short end on the bottom side. Just like that. All right, it's in there. Now I'm gonna take it over to my hard surface over here and kind of push down. Looking to the side, I'm gonna make sure to try to get them at the same height. Just like that. All right, and then we can, as always, test, make sure it's gonna go through. That's gonna look just pretty good right there. Just enough to peek over. Perfect. All right. And just like before, we are going to just tack down one of the sides. I like to add a little bit of solder to the tip, and then there you go, just like that, touch it in there. And now that's in there, you want to straighten it up. So I'm gonna, again, look to the side. I'm gonna wet the solder and make sure it's nice and straight. There we go. The bottom is flush right here, all the way across. And then now we can finish the solder joints. So here we go. We're gonna do a little bit of solder on the tip. Clean tip, always. All right, so I'm gonna add a little bit. Now remember, just a little bit of solder, and I'll tell you why in just a little while. But you just want it to flow into the hole. This is the ground, so it's gonna take a little bit more heat. All right. So those are all on there, just like you want it. And just, again, like before, be very careful not to nick anything, but we're just gonna kind of pry, just squeeze gently, prying it up. Very gently. Take your time. There we go. Now you get it off. And there's that. And of course, we take the big guy. Get it on there straight, making sure it's not touching anything else. If I can frame this up right, see how we got it on there? All right, it's not touching anything else. So I'm gonna grab pins with this finger, snap with that finger. And now those are nice and straight. Okay, so now we got all of our pins on. Let's see, they all look pretty decent, pretty good. So what we want to do now is we want to clean all this excess flux off of here. And the reason is because once we start putting the electronics on, we want this to not get so hot, and I'll show you. So I'm gonna use some alcohol and a little bit of flux cleaner, and just get some flux remover on here, just like that. And then of course, just clean a good bit of that off. Doesn't have to be perfect, but we want to get it nice and clean. And then let's use this guy right here with some alcohol on it. There we go. All right, nice and clean. Take a paper towel and just kind of blot all that off, and all that extra flux and debris goes onto the paper towel and out of the sponge. There we go. Okay, so now that that's done, it's fairly clean on this side. We're not going to worry about this side just yet. We will go ahead and add the VTX. Alright, so if you're using the TNR, go ahead and stick it through the hole. And then you'll just put your VTX on just like that. Alright, now you can also, I've got these, I'm not going to do it to this one, but I've got these thermal pads right here, these little silicone thermal pads. Snip off a little bitty piece and put it on the processor right there on that chip. Snip off a little square piece and put it on there, and then you know, install the board and make sure it's nice and flat on there, and that'll help you dissipate a lot of that heat into the actual Proton board. All right, so that's on there. So what I'm gonna do is now, like we did before, kind of like welding, you just want to tack down one side of it. And we'll tack down just this side. Just a little bit of solder, not a lot. You just want to barely get it on there. And then just to make sure the board's flat, I'm gonna kind of put my finger on it, wet the solder, and just make sure everything's good and flat. And before I do all the rest of the joints, make sure it's exactly how you want it. Looks good to me. All right, so let's go ahead and get the rest of those 5 joints soldered up. Got to be extremely careful, and this is why you use a small soldering tip, because there's components right next to these solder pads, and you don't want to touch those at all. In fact, I'm going to move this like here so that I can get to it from this side. Let me make it a little easier. All right. So again, just enough to wet it. You don't want to get too much solder in there. I'm gonna do the ground last, so go ahead and do this one. Just a little bit, doesn't have to be a lot. And then we'll go ahead and get the ground done. All right, right, there we go. We see that it touched. Okay. All right, so now that that is done, got this soldered up. You want to look in between the boards. So you want to look like in this little space right here. And you want to see, make sure there's no really big solder bridges going all the way down. See, this one is, I don't know if you can see that, probably not. This one right here is a fairly decent size, but we know that that's good. You can look in through this way, just to make sure they're not touching each other. And then of course you can take your meter and check continuity between each to also make sure they're not touching each other. None of these should have any kind of continuity whatsoever to each other. So you just go by testing those. I know this wasn't good, so I'm gonna go ahead and move to the Atto. So same thing with the Atto. What you wanna do is this, you can cut off a piece of that that heat dissipation stuff, whatever the stuff's called, thermal stuff, and put it on there, or use your thermal compound. And same thing, you're going to put it on the pins. Now, let's see here what's going on. Go ahead and get this on there. This is a tight fit. I've already taken these off and putting them back on. That's why it's a little bit of a tighter fit. There's some solder in those holes. So I'm just gonna, yeah, there we go. Now it's nice and snug in there. It's kind of loose right now. If you have the thermal compound, that'll keep it stuck in place. But I'm not doing that for this one. So I'm just gonna solder up one side. This side's the ground, so I'm gonna do this side right here. Again, be very careful not to touch anything else other than the pad and the pin. So just a little bit of solder, see it sucked right in there, and now my board is kind of lopsided. See how the board is all like up like that? So I'm just gonna put my finger on it, wet this joint a little bit. And just make sure it's sitting down flat. There we go. Now it's sitting flat. Looks real good. All right, so now we can go ahead and get the rest of these joints soldered up. These are the hardest ones because there's really, really small components right next to each of these solder pads, so you just have to be very diligent, careful. I'm using a big magnifying glass to be able to see up close. All right, let's go ahead and get these on there. Add a little bit of solder, I'm gonna clean the tip. Add a little bit of solder. Just a little bit. It wicks really fast, so you just want a little bit, because if you leave it on there too much or add too much solder, then it's all going to pool up underneath and it's going to start bridging these pins. This is the ground, so we want a little bit more heat on the ground. It'll take a little bit longer. There we go. So that's on there. Now it looks like there's not too much, like there's not enough solder on it because it all wicked to the inside. But trust me, you're good. It's gonna be on there nice and strong. It's not going anywhere. Again, you want to check the continuity between each of these pins. There should be no continuity in those. And then of course you want to check the continuity going from each pin to their respective pad over here to make sure that's all correct. And also check the continuity on these pads. Make sure those are not bridged or anything. All right, so we got it on. Everything looks good. Now what we want to do is clean the board. You want to get all that excess flux off of there. I use this MG Chemicals flux remover pen. It's a really good flux remover pen, and I just get it wet, real wet in there. It's still kind of hot, but you want to let it cool down really. But I'm going to add some alcohol to it with the brush and brush it all that excess solder flux off. This also gets the solder balls, maybe those really small solder balls that showed up, off of it. All right, and then I'm gonna take this guy, load it up with some alcohol, and just like kind of touch it. And it's gonna soak up all that excess alcohol and the flux off the boards. Clean this off. Some fresh alcohol on it. I like to get mine super clean. You want to get it super clean, especially if you're going to add some conformal coating later, because if you got excess flux or dirt or anything under your conformal coating, it's not going to stick. It's not going to stay. It's going to peel right off. Okay, there we go. That's all well and good, clean. We can go ahead and flip it over. Not much cleaning to do on this side. All right, there we go. So there we go. Now your board's all soldered up and ready to install. Now next, what we're going to do is desolder this, because that is the tricky part. And let's get to it.